Selena sat across from me, her arms crossed, exuding that quiet confidence she always carried in moments like this. The dim glow of the pendant light above us cast a shadow across her face, making it hard to tell if she was smirking or just waiting. I knew what she expected. It was always the same. We'd have a conversation, if you could call it that, where she laid out her grievances in that soft, measured tone, not outright accusing, just hinting. A strategic play, one she had perfected over the years. Then she'd pause, giving me just enough space to interject, to defend myself, to chase her approval like a starving dog chasing scraps. And by the end, I'd be the one apologizing, promising to do better, to be better. Tonight was no different, or at least she thought it wasn't. "You've been distant," she said, tilting her head slightly. "I don't know what's going on with you lately, but it's not working for me." Her voice was soft but firm, like a teacher scolding a child for not paying attention in class. I used to hate that tone because it always made me feel small, like I was the problem. But now, as I sat there listening to her, I felt something I hadn't before. Indifference. She studied my face, searching for a reaction, for that flicker of guilt or remorse she was used to seeing. But I gave her nothing. "I'm telling you this because I care," she continued, shifting slightly in her chair. "If I didn't care, I wouldn't even bring it up. But you're shutting me out, and honestly, I'm tired of feeling like I have to beg for your attention." Beg. That word nearly made me laugh. Selena had never begged for anything in her life. She didn't have to. She had a way of pulling people toward her, making them work for her approval, convincing them that her affection was something rare and valuable. It had taken me years to realize that was her game, and I had played right into it. "I hear you," I said finally, leaning back in my chair. Her eyes narrowed slightly. That wasn't the response she wanted. It wasn't a response at all. "Do you?" she asked, her tone sharpening just a little. "Because if you did, I think you'd have something more to say." I shrugged. "What do you want me to say?" She sighed, shaking her head as if I were deliberately making this difficult. "Maybe I was. This," she gestured between us, "isn't sustainable. You can't just check out whenever you feel like it and expect me to keep putting in all the effort. That's not how a relationship works." A relationship? I almost asked her when we had stopped having one, when it had shifted from being a partnership to a power struggle, from love to control. Maybe it had always been this way, and I had just been too blind to see it. She sat forward, her nails tapping against the table. "Look, I'm not trying to fight with you. I just need to know that you still care. Because if you don't..." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle between us. "I'm not going to keep waiting around for you to figure it out." Another play. I used to panic at this part. The idea of losing her, of being alone, had always sent me spiraling. I'd spend days proving myself, making it up to her in ways that never quite seemed to be enough. But something had shifted. For the first time, I saw this conversation for what it was. Not a discussion, not a plea for connection, just another move in the same game she had always played. She expected me to react, to fight for her, to beg. But I didn't feel the need to anymore. I sat there for a moment, looking at her, really looking at her. The woman I had spent years loving. The woman I had convinced myself I couldn't live without. And then, without anger, without resentment, I stood up. Selena blinked. "What are you doing?" I reached for my phone, sliding it into my pocket. "I think I'm done here." She let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Excuse me? I'm done," I repeated simply. No malice, no drama, just truth. Her expression flickered. Shock, disbelief, confusion. This wasn't how the conversation was supposed to go. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice sharper now. "Does it matter?" She scoffed, crossing her arms tighter. "Oh, so you're just going to walk away? That's mature." For a moment, I considered explaining myself, laying out everything I had realized, telling her that I wasn't playing her game anymore. But what was the point? She wouldn't understand, or worse. She'd try to pull me back in with another carefully chosen set of words, another ultimatum disguised as concern. So instead, I just turned and walked away. No raised voices, No dramatic exits, just silence. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. The next morning, I woke up in the guest room. It wasn't the first time I'd slept there, but it was the first time I had done so by choice. The room was colder than I was used to, the sheets stiffer, the mattress unfamiliar. But none of that mattered. I felt lighter than I had in years. When I walked into the kitchen, Selena was already there, sitting at the table with her coffee. She didn't look up as I entered, but I could feel the tension radiating off her. She was waiting for me to say something, to acknowledge last night, to fold like I always did. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. Nothing. I could sense her shifting slightly, adjusting her posture, waiting for the moment where I'd try to smooth things over. It was always the same. She'd hold her silence just long enough for me to cave first, for me to ask if she was upset, for me to find some way to make her feel better. And once I did, she'd know she still had control. But I wasn't playing anymore. I sipped my coffee, not looking at her, not reacting. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. Eventually, she exhaled sharply, her patience wearing thin. "So that's it?" she finally said. I glanced at her, keeping my expression neutral. "What do you mean?" Her eyes flashed. "You walk out in the middle of a conversation and now you're just... What? Pretending it didn't happen?" "I'm not pretending anything," I said simply. She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Right? Okay." More silence. I watched her fingers tighten around her coffee mug. She wasn't used to this. Me shutting down? That was part of the script. But me refusing to re-engage? That was something new. "You're acting like a child," she muttered, shaking her head. There it was, the first crack in her confidence. The insults always came when she started losing control. I didn't take the bait. More silence. Finally, she pushed back from the table and stood up. "You know what? Do whatever you want." Her voice was clipped, but I could hear the frustration buried underneath. She wanted me to react, to argue, to show that I cared. I didn't. She left the kitchen without another word. I finished my coffee, enjoying the quiet. That was the moment I knew things had shifted for good. Over the next few days, I changed little things. I started going to bed when I wanted, not waiting for her. I stopped filling the silences she left hanging. I spent more time on my own in the guest room, at the gym, outside. It wasn't about revenge or making her jealous. It was about reclaiming my life. At first, she pretended not to care. She went about her usual routine, scrolling through her phone on the couch, making plans with her friends, pretending like she wasn't paying attention to me. But I saw the way she watched me out of the corner of her eye. The first time I left the house without telling her where I was going, I caught the flicker of surprise on her face. She didn't ask, but I could feel the question lingering in the air. The second time, I saw the way her fingers tightened around her phone as I walked past. By the third time, she couldn't help herself. "Where have you been?" she asked casually one evening, trying to sound disinterested. I shrugged as I took off my shoes. "Out." Her jaw clenched slightly. "Out where?" I didn't answer right away. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she was trying to keep her voice even. This was uncharted territory for her. She was used to knowing my every move, to me checking in, to me being predictable. Now I was something else. She shifted on the couch. "It's weird," she said after a pause. "You disappearing all the time. It's like you're trying to prove something." I glanced at her. "Is that what you think?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. "I think it's a little pathetic, honestly." I smiled, not because it was funny, but because I could see right through her. She was trying to push me, to get me to react, to remind me that she still held the power. But she didn't. Not anymore. I didn't say anything. I just walked past her and into the guest room, shutting the door behind me. I knew exactly what would happen next. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet sounds of the house. I could hear Selena moving around in the other room, the occasional creak of the floorboards as she paced. She was restless, unsettled. I knew she wanted to say something, to drag me back into another conversation, another fight. Anything that would put us back into familiar territory. But I wasn't giving her that. I turned onto my side, forcing my mind to quiet. For years, I had spent nights like this second-guessing myself, wondering what I could do to make her happy, what I had done to push her away. I had memorized the feeling of guilt pressing down on my chest, of replaying every interaction, searching for where I had gone wrong. Tonight was different. There was no guilt, no weight, just a strange, eerie calm. Eventually, I drifted off. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. Habit, maybe, or maybe my body had adjusted to the absence of stress. The kind that had once made me hit snooze over and over, dreading the start of the day. I showered, got dressed, and walked into the kitchen. Selena was already up, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, her phone in her hand. She didn't look up as I walked in, but I knew she was aware of me. I poured my own coffee and leaned against the counter. More silence. I took a sip, watching her over the rim of my mug. She was pretending to be unfazed, scrolling through her phone as if she didn't care that I hadn't spoken to her, hadn't asked about her plans, hadn't folded like I always did. Finally, she set the phone down, pressing her lips together like she was debating something. Then, without looking at me, she said, "Are you really going to keep acting like this?" I raised an eyebrow. Like what? She exhaled sharply, like I was exhausting her. Like this, cold, distant, immature. I shrugged, taking another sip of coffee. "I don't feel cold," she scoffed, shaking her head. "You know what I mean." I waited. She wasn't used to this, to being the one trying. She was used to me chasing, me fixing, me holding on. She tapped her nails against the table, something she always did when she was irritated. "I just don't get what you're trying to do," she said finally. "Are you punishing me?" That almost made me laugh. "Punishing you?" I repeated. She looked at me then, finally, her eyes searching mine. "Yeah, you walk away in the middle of a conversation. You barely talk to me. You disappear without saying anything. What am I supposed to think?" I tilted my head slightly. "I don't know. Maybe that I'm just living my life." That threw her off. I could see it in the way her mouth pressed into a thin line, the way her fingers curled slightly around her coffee mug. "Right?" she said after a moment. "That's what this is about. You living your life." She said it like it was something foreign, something ridiculous. I didn't respond. She let out another sharp breath. "You know what? Fine. Do whatever you want." And with that, she grabbed her phone, stood up, and walked out of the kitchen. But I caught it, the hesitation in her step, the way she lingered just a second longer than necessary, as if waiting for me to stop her. I didn't, and that was the first time she realized she was losing control. Over the next few days, the shift became undeniable. Selena stopped pretending she didn't care. She started hovering, subtly at first, lingering near me when I was on my phone, asking casual questions that weren't really casual at all. "So, what have you been up to lately?" She tried to make it sound offhand, but I could hear the underlying curiosity, the need for information. I just shrugged. "Nothing much." The frustration in her eyes was quick, barely a flicker before she masked it. Later that evening, she tried a different approach. I was in the living room watching TV when she walked in and sat next to me. Not across the room, not in her usual spot, but right next to me. Close enough that our legs almost touched. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there, scrolling on her phone, shifting slightly like she was waiting for me to acknowledge her presence. I didn't. After a few minutes, she sighed dramatically. "I was thinking we should go out this weekend." I glanced at her. "Oh yeah." She nodded, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "Yeah, dinner, maybe a movie. We haven't really done anything together in a while." I studied her for a moment. For years, I would have jumped at that offer. I would have been relieved, eager, grateful that she was making an effort. But now, I just saw it for what it was. A test. A way to see if she still had me wrapped around her finger. I leaned back against the couch, stretching my arm along the back of it. "I've got plans this weekend." Her head snapped toward me. "Plans?" "Yeah." She blinked. "With who?" I let the question hang in the air, pretending to be interested in the TV. Her voice was a little sharper when she asked again. "Who are you going out with?" I finally looked at her, tilting my head. "Why do you care?" That hit a nerve. She straightened up slightly, gripping her phone tighter. "I don't," she said too quickly. "I was just asking." I nodded slowly, then turned back to the TV. Selena didn't move right away. I could feel her watching me, waiting for me to cave, to give her an answer, to reassure her that she was still in control. But I wasn't playing anymore. Eventually, she stood up and walked out of the room. I smiled to myself. She was starting to panic. Selena started changing tactics. At first, she pretended not to care. She still went about her usual routine, running errands, texting her friends, acting as if nothing had shifted between us. But I could see the cracks forming. The way she watched me out of the corner of her eye when she thought I wasn't looking. The way her jaw clenched slightly whenever I left the house without telling her where I was going. She was waiting for me to slip, to show some sign that I still needed her approval. But I had nothing left to prove. Then came the small gestures. She started appearing near me more often. Accidental touches, lingering in doorways, hovering close without speaking. One night, I was in the kitchen making a late-night snack when she walked in, wearing one of my old t-shirts. It was the same one she used to steal from my side of the closet when we were still good, back when she wanted me to think she needed a piece of me to sleep at night. She leaned against the counter, stretching her arms above her head. "Couldn't sleep?" "Nope." She ran a hand through her hair, watching me as I spread peanut butter onto a slice of bread. "You've been staying up late a lot lately." I shrugged. "Yeah, I guess." She shifted closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume. Something warm and familiar, something she used to wear when she wanted my attention. I took a bite of my sandwich and didn't react. After a moment, she sighed and turned toward the sink, running the tap as if she had actually come in for water. But I knew her better than that. She was testing the waters, trying to see if she could still pull me in. When she finally left the kitchen, I saw the frustration in the way she moved, the stiffness in her shoulders. She wasn't used to this. She didn't like feeling uncertain. The next day, she changed strategies again. I had just gotten back from a run when I walked into the living room and found her sitting on the couch, looking at old photos on her phone. She glanced up at me, her expression softer than it had been in weeks. "Remember this?" She turned the screen toward me. It was a picture from years ago. Some vacation we had taken together, back when things were easy. We were on a beach, my arm wrapped around her waist, both of us laughing at something just outside the frame. I glanced at it and nodded. "Yeah, good trip." She studied me, like she was waiting for more. After a moment, she set her phone down. "We were happy then." I grabbed a bottle of water from the counter. "Yeah, we were." Silence stretched between us. I could feel the weight of what she wanted to say, the unspoken plea hanging in the air. This was the moment where, in the past, I would have softened, where I would have told her that we could get back to that we just needed to work on things. But I wasn't the same man anymore. She sighed, picking at a loose thread on the couch cushion. "I don't know when things got so complicated." I didn't answer. Finally, she stood up, brushing imaginary lint off her jeans. "I was thinking we could go out tonight, just the two of us." I took a sip of water, letting her words settle. She was watching me closely now, waiting for my reaction. I swallowed and nodded. "You should go. Get out of the house for a bit." Her expression flickered, confusion crossing her face. "I meant the two of us." I nodded again. "Yeah, I know." For the first time in a long time, she looked uncertain. "So, you don't want to?" I set the water bottle down on the counter and met her gaze. "Selena, what exactly do you want from me?" She hesitated, crossing her arms. "I want us to be okay." I let out a small laugh, shaking my head. "No, you want me to go back to being the guy who chases you, who breaks my own back to make you happy. That's what you miss." She stiffened. "That's not fair, isn't it?" She swallowed hard, her jaw tightening. "I'm trying, okay? I don't know what else you want me to do." I studied her for a moment. "The problem is, you don't actually want to fix anything. You just don't like feeling like you're losing." She flinched like I had hit her. I didn't say anything else. I just turned and walked out of the room. That night, I packed a bag. Not to leave permanently, just for a few days. I needed space. Space to breathe, to think, to remind myself that I had a life outside of her. Selena didn't say anything when she saw me with the duffel bag slung over my shoulder. But I could see the panic creeping in around the edges. "Where are you going?" she asked, trying to sound indifferent. "Just getting away for a bit." She crossed her arms tightly. "That's really mature." I zipped up my jacket. I think it's the only mature thing I've done in a long time. For the first time in years, I walked out the door without telling her when I'd be back. And for the first time, I didn't care if she was waiting.